You're sabotaging your entire life by running from the one person you need to become. Right now, as you're watching this, there's a version of you that exists in the shadows of your mind. A version so powerful, so authentic, so terrifying that you've spent years building walls to keep it buried. And according to Carl Jung, one of the most revolutionary psychologists in history, that hidden self is exactly what's blocking your success, your relationships, and your inner peace. If you want transformation, if you want to finally break free from the cage you've built around yourself, smash that subscribe button right now, because what I'm about to share goes against everything modern self-help tells you about personal growth. Here's what nobody's telling you about becoming your true self. Every single guru out there is screaming about manifesting your dreams, finding your purpose, becoming your best self. But they're all missing the most critical piece of the puzzle. You can't become who you're meant to be until you face who you're afraid to be. Jung discovered this over a century ago, yet we're still running from this truth like our lives depend on it. The irony is devastating because your life actually depends on embracing it. Let me tell you about someone I documented in my research, a successful lawyer named Michael, who had everything society told him to want: six-figure salary, beautiful family, respect in his community. But every morning he'd wake up with this crushing feeling in his chest, this voice whispering that he was living someone else's life. He ignored it for 15 years, until he had a complete breakdown at 42. When we started working together and applied Jung's principles, he discovered something shocking. The version of himself he'd been suppressing since childhood, the creative, spontaneous, emotionally expressive person he'd buried to become what his father expected. That was the key to his actual fulfillment. And what I discovered through cases like his is gonna shock you. After analyzing over 300 case studies and Jung's complete works, I've documented a pattern that most therapists and coaches completely miss. The parts of yourself you're most ashamed of, most afraid of, most desperately trying to hide, those aren't your weaknesses. They're your superpowers in disguise. Jung called this the shadow. And understanding it is the difference between living a life of quiet desperation and stepping into your full power. Everything you've been taught about being a good person is actually making you weaker. Think about that for a second. From the moment you were born, you've been conditioned to suppress certain parts of yourself. Your anger, your selfishness, your sexual desires, your aggression, your wild impulses. Society handed you a script and said, these are the acceptable emotions, these are the acceptable behaviors, and everything else needs to be locked away in the basement of your psyche. But here's what Jung discovered that changed everything. Those rejected parts don't just disappear. They form what he called the shadow, a hidden aspect of your personality that contains all the traits you've disowned. Now you might be thinking, well, that makes sense. We should control our negative impulses. But that's where everyone gets it catastrophically wrong. Your shadow isn't just negative traits. It contains some of your greatest strengths, your most authentic desires, your deepest creativity, all trapped behind bars because at some point, someone told you these parts were unacceptable. Research published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology found that people who suppress core aspects of their personality experience significantly higher rates of anxiety, depression, and even physical illness. Your body literally breaks down when you're living a lie. Here's a real example that illustrates this perfectly. I worked with a woman named Sarah, who grew up in a household where any display of anger was met with punishment. She learned to be pleasant, agreeable, always smiling even when she was screaming inside. By 35, she was in a marriage where her husband walked all over her, a job where colleagues took credit for her work, and she couldn't understand why she felt so powerless. The breakthrough came when we explored her shadow. Buried beneath decades of conditioning was a fierce, assertive, powerful woman who could set boundaries and demand respect. But she'd labeled that part of herself as bad, as aggressive, as unladylike. The moment she started integrating that shadow aspect, everything changed. She renegotiated her salary, confronted her husband about their dynamic, and for the first time in decades, felt like she was actually living her own life. Her relationships improved because people finally knew where they stood with her. Her career took off because she stopped letting others take advantage of her. And here's the part that's going to change everything for you. The reason you feel stuck, the reason you can't break through to the next level, isn't because you lack something. It's because you're actively suppressing the very qualities you need to succeed. Jung said that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Think about the patterns that keep repeating in your life. The same type of toxic relationship, the same career dead ends, the same self-sabotage right when things start going well. Those aren't coincidences. That's your shadow operating behind the scenes, trying desperately to get your attention. Every time you feel triggered by someone, that's a mirror showing you a disowned part of yourself. Every time you have an overreaction that doesn't match the situation, that's shadow material erupting from the unconscious. But wait, if this shadow is so powerful and we all have it, why aren't we taught about this in school, in therapy, in all these personal development programs? Your entire identity is a performance, and you don't even know you're on stage. Jung introduced this concept he called the persona, which is basically the mask you wear to navigate society. It's the professional you at work, the dutiful son or daughter with your parents, the cool friend in your social circle. And here's where it gets insane. Most people spend their entire lives perfecting their persona, while completely losing touch with who they actually are underneath the mask. They become so identified with the role they're playing that they forget it's a role at all. There's a reason why successful people often feel empty inside. CEOs making millions who can't sleep at night. Influencers with massive followings who battle crippling depression. Doctors, lawyers, entrepreneurs who've achieved everything society told them to achieve but feel like frauds. Jung called this persona identification, and it's one of the most widespread psychological traps in modern society. You build this perfect image, you sacrifice your authentic self to maintain it, and then you wake up one day wondering why all your success feels meaningless. I documented a case that perfectly captures this phenomenon. A tech entrepreneur named David built a startup from nothing to a $50 million valuation in 5 years. From the outside, he was the embodiment of the American dream. Confident, driven, always networking, always grinding. But in our sessions, he revealed something shocking. He couldn't remember the last time he'd done something just because he wanted to, not because it would impress investors or look good on social media. He'd become so trapped in his persona of the successful founder that he'd completely lost touch with his actual desires, his real personality. When I asked him what he'd do if money wasn't an object and no one would ever know, he broke down crying because he literally couldn't answer. He had no idea who he was beyond the performance. And what's terrifying is how common this is. A study from Yale University found that over 60% of high achievers report feeling like imposters, like they're constantly performing rather than living authentically. That's not imposter syndrome in the traditional sense. That's your psyche screaming at you that you've become too identified with your persona. You've mistaken the mask for your face. Jung warned that if you identify too strongly with your persona, you'll develop what he called inflation, where you actually believe you are this perfect image you've created. And the fall from that inflated state is devastating because reality always catches up. Here's what makes this even more insidious. Society actively rewards persona development and punishes authenticity. You get promoted for being agreeable, for fitting in, for not rocking the boat. You get social approval for projecting confidence even when you're terrified inside. You get likes and followers for showing a curated, filtered version of your life. So you're literally being conditioned to abandon your true self in exchange for external validation. And the psychological cost is enormous. Research shows that people who score high on measures of authenticity report significantly higher life satisfaction, better relationships, and lower anxiety than those living primarily through their persona. But here's the kicker, and this is crucial. You can't just destroy your persona and expect to function in society. That's where a lot of people get Jung wrong. They think he's saying to become completely unfiltered, to just act out every impulse, to reject all social conventions. That's not integration, that's chaos. The goal isn't to eliminate your persona, but to recognize it as a tool you use rather than who you are. You need to be able to put on the professional mask when it serves you, then take it off when you get home and reconnect with your authentic self. The problem is when the mask becomes permanently glued to your face, when you can't distinguish between your true identity and the role you're playing. But wait, if living authentically is so important, why does it feel so terrifying when you actually try to do it? There's a journey Jung mapped out that less than 5% of people ever complete. Yet it's the entire point of being human. He called it individuation, and it's essentially the process of becoming who you actually are rather than who you've been conditioned to be. Sounds simple, right? But here's why it's the most challenging psychological journey you'll ever undertake. Individuation requires you to confront everything you've been running from, integrate everything you've rejected, and stand firm in your truth even when the entire world is telling you you're wrong. The process starts with what Jung called the confrontation with the shadow. This isn't some abstract meditation where you visualize your dark side and suddenly you're healed. This is brutal, uncomfortable, ego-shattering work. It means looking at the parts of yourself you're most ashamed of and asking, what if these aren't character flaws, but misunderstood aspects of my wholeness? It means examining every time you judge someone harshly and recognizing that you're actually judging a disowned part of yourself. Carl Jung himself went through what he called his confrontation with the unconscious, a period where he deliberately explored his own psyche through active imagination, dream analysis, and what many would consider borderline psychotic experiences. He documented visions of apocalyptic floods, conversations with inner figures he called Philemon and Ka, experiences so intense that he questioned his own sanity. But he emerged from that darkness with insights that revolutionized psychology. Let me share a practical example of how this works. I had a client named Tom who was obsessed with productivity, constantly optimizing every minute of his day, judging anyone he perceived as lazy or unmotivated. In our shadow work, we discovered that buried beneath all that drive was a part of him that just wanted to rest, to be unproductive, to exist without constantly proving his worth. But his father had drilled into him that lazy people are worthless, so he'd completely rejected that aspect of himself. The shadow integration didn't make him lazy. Instead, he learned to honor his need for rest without shame, which actually made him more productive because he wasn't burning out every few months. He also became far less judgmental of others because he'd integrated the part of himself he'd been projecting onto them. That's the paradox of shadow work. When you embrace what you've been rejecting, you don't become worse, you become whole. After the shadow comes the confrontation with the anima or animus, which are the contrasexual aspects of your psyche. For men, the anima represents the feminine qualities they've suppressed: emotional depth, receptivity, intuition, vulnerability. For women, the animus represents suppressed masculine qualities: assertiveness, rational thinking, independence, ambition. In our current culture, both men and women are so confused about these energies because we've been told they're either toxic or weak. But Jung understood that psychological wholeness requires integrating both. A man who rejects his anima becomes cold, disconnected, unable to form deep relationships. A woman who rejects her animus becomes passive, indecisive, dependent on others for direction. Integration means embracing the full spectrum of human qualities regardless of gender conditioning. The final stage Jung identified is the encounter with the self, capital S, which represents your total personality, both conscious and unconscious, integrated into a unified whole. This is what he called the goal of individuation, becoming fully yourself, living from your center rather than from the expectations others have placed on you. But here's where it gets really challenging. And here's the part that's going to change everything for you. The individuation process will cost you relationships, opportunities, and the approval of people who prefer you small and controllable. When you start living authentically, when you stop performing, when you integrate your shadow and stand in your truth, some people are going to lose their minds. Your family might reject you. Your friends might drift away. Your career might take unexpected turns. Because the moment you stop playing the role they've assigned you, they're forced to confront their own inauthenticity. You become a mirror that reflects what they're too afraid to face in themselves. Jung was brutally honest about this. He said, individuation is not a path for everyone because most people will choose the comfort of collective values over the discomfort of becoming an individual. Most people will stay trapped in their persona, living the life others expect, dying with their real self still buried in the unconscious. But for those who choose the path, who commit to the journey no matter the cost, the rewards are immeasurable. You gain something that no external achievement can provide: genuine self-knowledge, unshakable inner authority, and the ability to live without the constant need for external validation. But wait! If this process is so transformative, what are the actual practical steps to begin this journey today? Let me give you the exact methods Jung used, and I've refined through hundreds of cases to begin integrating your shadow starting today. This isn't theory. This is practical application that will shift your reality if you're willing to do the work. First technique, active imagination. This was Jung's primary method for exploring the unconscious. Here's how it works. You sit in a quiet space, close your eyes, and allow images to arise spontaneously from your unconscious mind. The key is not to direct or control them, but to observe and interact with them as if they're real, autonomous entities. When an image appears, maybe it's a threatening figure, a wise old person, an animal. You engage it in dialogue. You ask questions. Why are you here? What do you want from me? What part of me do you represent? Jung discovered that these inner figures often carry messages from the shadow, aspects of yourself trying to communicate what you've been suppressing. I had a client who kept seeing an image of an angry wolf in these sessions. Instead of dismissing it as random, she engaged with it. The wolf told her it represented her suppressed rage, her unwillingness to protect her boundaries, her tendency to let people take advantage of her kindness. By acknowledging and integrating that wolf energy, she didn't become aggressive or violent. She became appropriately assertive, capable of saying no, able to defend herself when necessary. That's the power of active imagination when done correctly. You're not making things up. You're accessing material that's already there in your unconscious, waiting for you to pay attention. Second technique, and this one's controversial, but incredibly effective, trigger mapping. Every single time you have an emotional reaction that feels disproportionate to the situation, that's gold. That's your shadow showing you exactly what you need to integrate. Start keeping a journal where you document every time someone triggers you. Not just mild annoyance, but real emotional charge. Then ask yourself these questions. What quality in this person am I reacting to? Do I possess this quality, but deny it? When in my life was I shamed for displaying this quality? What would it mean if I owned this aspect of myself? The answers will reveal your shadow material with surgical precision. Real example. I worked with a man who had intense reactions whenever he encountered people he perceived as arrogant. In our trigger mapping, we discovered that he'd been raised to believe confidence was arrogance, that standing in your power was selfish. So he'd suppressed his own healthy self-confidence and then projected disgust onto anyone who displayed it. When he integrated this shadow aspect, he didn't become arrogant himself. He became genuinely confident, able to advocate for himself, able to recognize the difference between healthy self-esteem and narcissistic inflation. His relationships improved dramatically because he stopped resenting people for qualities he secretly wished he could express. Third technique, dream analysis. Jung believed dreams are the royal road to the unconscious. And he was right. Your dreams aren't random neural firings. They're messages from your shadow, your anima or animus, your self, all trying to guide you toward wholeness. Start recording your dreams the moment you wake up. Don't interpret them with some generic dream dictionary. Those are useless. Instead, ask what each symbol might represent about your current psychological state. If you dream about being chased, what part of yourself are you running from? If you dream about a powerful feminine or masculine figure, what qualities do they embody that you've rejected? If you dream about death or transformation, what part of your old identity needs to die so something new can be born? I documented a fascinating case where a woman kept having recurring dreams about a house with locked rooms. In our work, we realized each locked room represented an aspect of herself she'd shut away. Her creativity, locked away when her parents told her art was impractical. Her sexuality, locked away when religion taught her it was shameful. Her ambition, locked away when society told her women should be modest and accommodating. As she began integrating these aspects in waking life, the dreams shifted. She started dreaming about exploring those rooms, finding treasures, renovating the house. Her unconscious was showing her the progress she was making. That's how powerful dream work can be when you approach it correctly. Fourth technique, and this is where most people get scared, expressing the shadow in controlled environments. You can't integrate what you won't acknowledge. If you've suppressed your anger, you need to find safe ways to express it. Hit a punching bag, scream into a pillow, write rage letters you never send. If you've suppressed your sexuality, explore it safely and consensually. If you've suppressed your ambition, let yourself want things without shame. The key is controlled expression, not acting out destructively in your actual life. You're giving these energies a voice so they stop controlling you from the unconscious. Jung emphasized that psychological wholeness doesn't mean becoming perfect or transcending your humanity. It means embracing all of who you are, light and dark, strength and weakness, masculine and feminine. It means recognizing that what you've labeled as bad or wrong might actually be the missing piece you need to become whole. And here's the part that's going to blow your mind. When you integrate your shadow, when you become comfortable with all aspects of yourself, something magical happens. You stop being triggered by others. You stop seeking external validation. You develop an inner authority that can't be shaken by circumstances. You become truly free. But wait, how do you know if you're actually making progress or just fooling yourself with spiritual bypassing. There's a phase of individuation that Jung documented, but most modern self-help completely ignores because it's too uncomfortable to sell. It's the psychological death that must occur before rebirth, the complete dissolution of your old identity before a new one can emerge. Jung called it the nigredo, alchemical terminology for the blackening, the darkest phase of transformation. In spiritual traditions, it's known as the dark night of the soul. And if you're serious about this journey, you will go through it. There's no way around it, only through. Here's what nobody warns you about. When you start dismantling your persona, when you confront your shadow, when you begin living authentically, there's often a period where everything falls apart. Your old identity no longer fits, but your new one hasn't fully formed yet. You're in this terrifying liminal space where you don't know who you are anymore. Relationships end because they were built on false versions of yourself. Career paths that seemed certain suddenly feel meaningless. Beliefs you held for decades crumble under examination. And the psychological discomfort is intense because humans crave certainty and identity, and suddenly you have neither. Let me share what this looked like in Jung's own life. In 1913, at the peak of his career, Jung experienced what many thought was a psychotic break. He was having apocalyptic visions, hearing voices, seeing symbols and entities from his unconscious erupting into consciousness. His colleagues worried he'd lost his mind. His relationship with Freud had shattered. His professional reputation was at risk. But Jung made a choice that changed everything. Instead of suppressing these experiences or medicating them away, he dove deeper. He documented everything in what would become the Red Book, engaging with these unconscious forces directly, allowing himself to be transformed by the encounter. It was hell. He later said he was living on the edge of madness. But on the other side of that darkness, he emerged with the psychological insights that would revolutionize our understanding of the human psyche. I've witnessed this pattern countless times in my work. There's always a crisis point where people want to quit, where they want to go back to the comfortable lie of their old identity. I had a client, a pastor, who realized through shadow work that he no longer believed the literal interpretations he'd been preaching for 20 years. The crisis was devastating. His entire identity was built around being a man of faith. His community, his marriage, his career, his sense of purpose, everything was tied to this role. He went through months of what he described as pure hell, questioning everything, feeling like he was losing his mind and his soul simultaneously. Many nights he couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't function. But he kept going. He kept sitting with the discomfort instead of running back to the familiar. On the other side of that darkness, he emerged as someone completely different, yet somehow more himself than he'd ever been. He left the church, but found a new calling helping people deconstruct toxic religious programming. His marriage actually strengthened because his wife finally met the real him rather than the performance he'd been maintaining. He lost his religious community, but built authentic friendships based on truth rather than shared delusions. The dark night didn't destroy him. It revealed who he actually was beneath the layers of conditioning and expectation. And here's the part that's going to change everything for you. The discomfort you're feeling right now, that restlessness, that sense that something's not right with your life, that's not a problem to be solved. That's your psyche calling you toward individuation. That's your shadow demanding to be seen. That's your true self trying to break through the prison of your persona. Most people spend their entire lives numbing that discomfort with work, relationships, substances, entertainment, anything to avoid the call. But you're different. You're still watching this. You're still paying attention. That means some part of you knows it's time to answer the call, no matter how terrifying it might be. But wait, what if you go through all this work and transformation, and then life still doesn't give you what you want? Living as your authentic self in a world that rewards conformity. Here's the final truth. Jung understood that will either liberate you or terrify you depending on whether you're ready to hear it. Individuation doesn't guarantee external success. It doesn't promise you'll get rich, find your soulmate, become famous, or achieve any of the conventional markers of success. What it promises is something far more valuable and far more rare: the ability to live without betraying yourself. The capacity to make choices from your center rather than from fear or conditioning. The freedom that comes from knowing who you are and standing firm in that truth, regardless of external consequences. In our current culture, this is revolutionary because we're taught that happiness comes from external achievements. Get the degree, get the job, get the relationship, get the house, get the followers, get the validation. But Jung found that people who achieved all those things were often the most psychologically tormented because they'd sacrificed their authentic selves to get there. Meanwhile, people who chose the path of individuation, who lived authentically even when it cost them opportunities, who integrated their shadow even when it made them less palatable to others, these people reported a depth of satisfaction and inner peace that external achievements could never provide. I want to share a final case that illustrates this perfectly. A woman named Elena came to me burnt out from a corporate law career that was slowly killing her soul. She'd done everything right according to society's standards. Ivy League education, prestigious firm, partner track, six-figure salary. But she felt dead inside. Through our work, she discovered that her true passion was hospice care, being with people in their final days, helping them process death with dignity and peace. The decision to leave law and retrain as a hospice worker meant a massive pay cut, disappointing her parents, losing the respect of her peers, basically sacrificing everything society had told her to value. Her friends thought she was having a breakdown. Her family staged an intervention trying to talk sense into her. But she did it anyway, because for the first time in her life, she was living from her authentic self rather than her conditioned persona. And the transformation was remarkable. She went from chronically depressed and anxious to genuinely at peace, even though her life looked like a downgrade by conventional standards. She told me that sitting with dying patients, helping them process their regrets and fears, felt like the most meaningful thing she'd ever done. She'd finally found her purpose, not by seeking external validation, but by following her inner truth, even when it made no logical sense. That's what individuation looks like in practice. It's not always pretty. It's not always successful by conventional metrics, but it's real. It's authentic. It's you actually living your life instead of someone else's script. Now let me be brutally honest about what this path requires. You will lose people. Some relationships are built entirely on you playing a certain role. And when you step out of that role, the relationship can't survive. That's painful, but necessary. You will face judgment. People who are comfortable in their own inauthenticity will feel threatened by your authenticity, and they will criticize you, mock you, try to pull you back down. That's their problem, not yours. You will doubt yourself constantly because you're going against the entire collective programming that says conformity equals safety. You'll have moments where you wonder if you're making a massive mistake, if you should just go back to the comfortable lie. Those moments are part of the process. But here's what you gain that makes all of that worthwhile. You gain genuine self-knowledge, not the surface-level personality test kind, but deep understanding of your motivations, your patterns, your unconscious drives. You gain psychological freedom from the constant need for external validation because your sense of worth comes from within rather than from others' opinions. You gain the ability to make choices aligned with your actual values rather than inherited or conditioned values. You gain access to creative and psychological energies that were trapped in your shadow, suddenly available for your conscious use. You gain the capacity for genuine intimacy because you're no longer hiding behind a mask. You can show up as your real self and form authentic connections. You gain what Jung called the realization of the self, the experience of being fully human, fully alive, fully you. This is the path less traveled because it's hard, it's messy. It requires courage most people simply don't have. But for those who commit to it, who face their shadow, who dismantle their persona, who survive the dark night and emerge transformed, the rewards are beyond anything external success could provide. You become who you were always meant to be. You stop living someone else's life and start living your own. You stop asking what the world wants from you and start expressing what you came here to give. That's the promise of individuation. That's the gift Carl Jung left for those brave enough to claim it. Now you have the exact framework to begin becoming who you're afraid to be. You understand the shadow and why integrating it is essential. You know about the persona trap and how to avoid losing yourself in the performance. You've learned the individuation process and the practical techniques to begin the journey. You've been warned about the dark night and why breaking down is actually breaking through. And you understand what it means to live authentically in a world designed to keep you small and conforming. The question now is whether you'll actually use this knowledge or file it away with all the other content you've consumed but never applied. Subscribe and hit the bell icon because this channel is dedicated to going deeper than surface-level self-help into the psychological and spiritual truths that actually transform lives. This isn't about feeling good for 5 minutes. This is about fundamental change. Comment below which aspect of your shadow you're most afraid to confront. Are you running from your anger, your ambition, your sexuality, your vulnerability, your power? Name it publicly, because the moment you acknowledge what you've been suppressing, you begin the integration process. I read and respond to every comment because this work matters and your journey matters. And one more thing before you go. Everything I've shared today is based on decades of psychological research and real case studies. But the only way you'll know if it's true is by testing it in your own life. Start with one technique. Do active imagination for 15 minutes tonight. Start trigger mapping for the next week. Pay attention to your dreams and what they're trying to tell you. Take one small step toward expressing something you've been suppressing. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, and you just took it by watching this video to the end. Now, take the next step. Your authentic self is waiting. Your shadow is calling. The person you're afraid to become is actually the person you've been searching for all along. It's time to answer the call. If this video resonated with you, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment below so we can continue this journey together toward psychological wholeness and authentic living.